one of the major issues that companies have is they're trying to bring the mindset of the go-to-market motion and the engine that they were building over the past 10 years into this new era. If you want to win the game, you got to recognize the game has changed.
The Next Gen Sales Leaders Podcast. Coffees for Closers.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Next Gen Sales Leader Podcast. I'm here with Justin Schreiber. He is the CEO and co-founder of Terit. It is a platform that gives you AI agents for sales, marketing, CS teams. Welcome to the show.
Great to be on, Ben. Thanks for having me.
So give us a high level. What does Terit do, and exactly what is the value prop for sales and marketing teams?
Well, at a high level, Terit does your sales chores for you. You know, I find it ironic that we look for people that'll run through walls, do whatever it takes to get deals done. What do we ask them to do on the first day of the job? We throw a manual down on their desk and say, all right, here's all the process I want you to follow and all the admin work that I want you to do. So we basically take all of that off your plate and in the process, increase win rates, make reps much more productive so that you can scale your organization without having to scale your workforce.
Very cool. So can we jump into the weeds? Is this an AI SDR? Is this something beyond that? Give us a sense of what category do you fit within?
So we actually focus on deal execution. Once you're in the deal, that's where we'll pick it up. We're not focused on the prospecting or the upfront SDR work. And there are a lot of solutions out there that do that. We interface with them and then they'd hand off to us once you're into the execution phase.
And is this mostly B2B or is there a B2C element?
This is definitely B2B, and actually where we find companies get the most value out of us when they've got complex enterprise sales that require a high level of selling skill, a lot of consultative selling, and also being able to constantly assess what are the plays that your team is running and be able to roll those out across the entire organization.
So is it more of an account-based motion type of deal?
Yep, that's right. So typically what our customers will run are multiple segments. You've got an SMB segment, maybe you've got a federal segment and a EMEA segment. All of those segments behave a little differently. And one of the challenges to traditional sales tools is they've kind of peanut buttered everything. You roll out a sales process and everybody needs to use that sales process. The reality is that the reason we have segments is because buyers within those segments buy differently. One of the powers of Terit is that we're attuned to the nuances of each of the segments. The AI can actually identify the optimal process that you need to run, and then we'll apply that sales process and the associated coaching within the segment to help to optimize behavior to the segment-specific motions that need to happen.
Great. So is this a plug-in into existing CRMs or is this a standalone platform? This is a break in the podcast to bring you our sponsor, RevOps.com. That is REVYOPS.com, the #1 GTM data management platform for your GTM and revenue operations data on planet Earth. If you are using the modern stack of Clay and Instantly and Email Bison and RB2B and Trigify and all these various tools scattered across the wind, we unify all that data all into one place so you don't have any duplicates, a unified view of every single contact so you can see all the data and all the activities across all the platforms all in one place. It will allow you and your team to move faster, to get better attribution across the entire funnel, and to make a heck of a lot more money. Go to RevOps.com, check out how you can get started today with me on a call where we'll learn about your data management problems and how we can get you guys to the next level of growth. See you guys at RevOps.com. Go there now. It will be in the show notes as well down below. Let's get back to the podcast.
So we interface with Salesforce, we interface with HubSpot. You can embed us directly in those applications. We've also got a standalone application and we'll run inside of Slack. So if you simply want to interact with us via Slack through different prompts and questions that you're asking, you can access it that way as well.
Oh, very interesting. So now in terms of the training here, so I'm going to take a step back and put my beginner CRO hat on. And I'm going to think about it from an extremely new business owner who has no clue what they're doing. And then I'm going to pivot into expert CRO.
Yeah.
So I'm playing dumb right now. So I don't know what a sales process is. Do you guys help solve that question if there is no pre-existing reality? Or is this something that you have to have somebody that goes and sets a base like ground zero, and then your system comes in and optimizes on top of it? Or what is the actual user experience like?
Yeah, from a sales process, we'll go from 0 to N. So as complicated as you want to get, we can get there. But out of the box, we've got pre-built sales processes modeled around all of the popular sales processes, whether it's spin selling. Medic arguably isn't a sales process, it's a qualification framework, but we built on top of Medic. So many times customers will come in and say, hey, got to be fully disclosed here. I don't have a sales process yet. The reality is, when you really peel back the layers, a sales process involves identifying pain. It's the 3 questions: why do anything, why do it now, and why do it with us? And then exploring the process, the budget, and the decision makers associated with that. Now, obviously, I'm simplifying it. There's different nuance, but we can go from here's a great out-of-the-box process that will get you up and running, all the way to, yeah, we can take that custom process that you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in developing with force management, and we can put that, operationalize that, and allow AI to automate the whole thing.
I'm going to set the context for anybody listening, because I think I have a relatively diverse audience in terms of some marketers, some CMOs, some CROs, a lot of GTM engineers, some sales reps. So everybody might have a different level of awareness or education around what is a sales process. You just gave us kind of the basics. What's the difference between a sales process and a GTM motion in your perspective?
Well, I would say that the sales process are the sets of steps or actions in order that you want your team to follow that you believe will result in optimal outcomes. And within that, there's a couple of dimensions to it. So I mentioned the actions. There's also definitions around exit criteria from one stage of the process to the next stage. We know, for example, that when a customer agrees to have a meeting with us and actually brings relevant people to the meeting, I've just advanced to a new sales stage. When they then say, we'd actually like to engage you in a formal process, you move to the next stage. So really good process is also going to have well-defined exit criteria that allow you to know when you move to the next process. I think one of the Achilles heels for sales process is many companies believe that they have one. The problem is that they haven't taken the time to define it at a very low level, not only the actions that need to happen, but how you actually know when you need to advance. And what ends up happening, if you're using Salesforce, for example, Ben, you might say, hey, this deal's in sales stage 2. I might say, actually, no, I think it's in sales stage 4. There's no definitive document or process, if you will, that allows both of us to agree on where that is. Ultimately, the way that manifests itself is you end up losing deals because your managers, your executives don't have real visibility into where the deals are. Coaching then is undermined. Making calls is undermined. So it seems like a tactical thing, but having agreement on what that sales process looks like and consistent application is the bedrock to any high-performing sales organization.
I completely agree, and I'm writing down some notes here. I think that the big mistake that I see new business owners who are implementing their first sales-led motion with a polished sales process is they mistake CRM for sales process and operation.
Yeah.
And they subscribe to HubSpot or Salesforce or you name the CRM, Close, Pipedrive, etc. The out-of-the-box steps that come out, they're like, oh, okay, that's a little pipeline. That makes sense. There's a first contact attempted stage. And they just assume that is what it is. It's that simple. And I would admit, 15 plus years ago when I started, I made the same assumption. And I would say that it has been counterintuitive and surprising to the degree to which a sales process can be nuanced and changed by different company types. And to your point about the agreements, it's one piece to have a technology, and there's a completely different thing to have an agreement upon the way the technology should be used and interacted with a human. And in the development world, there's this concept called the semantic layer, which is you have the database, which has all these different names and labels but then the thing that's showed to the human is essentially just a human phrase, right? Like title or revenue, right? And what's so interesting, because I've built multiple databases as a SaaS provider, is that I see how easy it is for two databases to have the same data in completely different language to communicate. And I look at the human brain in the same way, which is your definition of a step might be completely different than mine. But it turns out that that definition is actually really important if you want alignment across 50 sales reps, right?
Sure. Yep.
It's so fundamental, but it's so poorly adopted at early stage GTM motions for new businesses that don't understand the most basic idea. Do you find that, since you are deep in this world, this is your expertise, and you solve this problem, do you find that there's a educational requirement to bring a certain part of your prospects or customers up to speed, or do you just purposely ignore in a go-to-market way certain types of users that aren't ready for your type of product?
I think that at least intellectually, everyone understands that they need a sales process. They may not necessarily understand what that means, but they recognize that we need to have some kind of well-defined, consistently adopted approach to selling. So we typically don't need to convince people that that's a requirement. There is some education about what a sales process looks like. Where we tend to spend most of our time, though, is why does this thing break down? The reality is that we've been talking about sales process for 30 years now. I was, early days at Siebel. And at Siebel, back in the year 2000, we were talking about sales process. And yet, we are having the same conversations today about what is a sales process, how do you get your salespeople to use it, does it really work, that we were having 30 years ago. I think that we have had, the problem is that we haven't acknowledged the fact that there are some fundamental problems or gates with adopting in a uniform way a sales process. We just keep trying to tackle the problem with the same set of tools. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. Salespeople, generally speaking, are not highly process oriented. Again, we screen and we reward people that demonstrate an ability to think outside of the box. We love the stories about, that rep who spent her time in front of the child recital and waited for the CIO to walk out so that they could sign the thing. Like, there's no playbook that told her to do that. She just knew how to do that. And so taking a salesperson like that and then telling her, but you have to do 50 things in this order and complete it all. And by the way, I know you hate to do that and you'd rather be talking to somebody and building a relationship, but I don't care, do it anyway. That is just a recipe for failure, and we need to acknowledge that. So again, I don't think the problem is people don't get it. They don't realize that it's important. They don't understand why it's failing. And I think the number one opportunity with AI is you can basically enhance the human, compensate for all the things they don't like to do or they don't do well. AI is amazing at process. It's amazing at detail. And when you pair it with a talented rep who knows how to build relationships, solve problems, create value, then you've got a winning combination.
It's one of those things where it's such a important subject that I'm certain there are some of your prospects, correct me if I'm wrong, that are in love with their own process, right? They're like, this is my baby. I've been building this for 10 years. I'm one of those guys. That's why I'm saying this. It's like, I'm like, you're not changing my process. So how do you overcome that objection with a chief revenue officer who's like, look, I get that you have this thing that it optimizes the process, and I'm sure that it's great, but there's some sunk cost fallacy, some kind of hidden objection and belief that how could this thing possibly outdo me, Yeah. So do you get that a lot? Is that a thing?
Well, first of all, to your point about being in love with the sales process, I have a slide I love to share. And the slide says it takes 2,500 bolts to put a Ferrari together and one nut to scatter it all over the road. RevOps is building a Ferrari, and it drives them crazy when salespeople screw it up. And they're like, if only they would follow my sales process. It's beautiful. It is a well-crafted machine. It is a highly tuned engine. So I think there is inherently a tension between the RevOps leader, who's a systems thinker, who's process-oriented, and the salesperson. To your question about how do you persuade the RevOps leader or the CRO that maybe their system or their process isn't optimized? We don't really have to do that, because we'll take their sales process and we will embed it in our tool. And we've actually got a very simple configuration. You can literally give us a Word document or a PowerPoint slide. We upload that and the system self-configures. So suddenly you see all of your sales stages, you see all the milestones, all the AI prompts on the back end are generated. So suddenly the data starts flowing and filling in your sales process automatically. What we do with that is we eliminate the human variable. A lot of times when salespeople realize that the sales process isn't working, they immediately attribute it to the fact that salespeople just aren't using it correctly, and not the fact that the sales process is broken. So when you automate it and use it consistently, you then can get data that shows you, if you follow the sales process, here are the outcomes you can expect. If you've got anomalous behavior, you can benchmark that against the consistent behavior. And actually, that's what unlocks new learnings and insights, because the AI then starts to realize, you said you're supposed to do A, B, and C, but if you do A, C, and B, you actually increase your win rate by 2%. And those are the kinds of nuanced, tuning that you could never do before.
What most people don't know, who don't think about this, is that 90+% of cost to acquire is post-lead capture. So in other words, you generate a lead. Let's say it costs $300 to generate a meeting. I'm making up a number. But in my experience, cold outbound, outside of the Fortune 2000, you are looking at, in the SMB mid-market, you're looking at right around $300. It obviously goes up dramatically if you go into the higher tiers, it could be $3,000 for a qualified meeting.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, where most of the cost is, if you look at, okay, how many of those show and how many of those actually qualify and how many of those actually move into the qualification or the qualified pipeline flows, such as like a proposal sent and a term sent and et cetera, you have this fall off. And each one of those fall offs cascades into this massive cost to acquire that most people don't understand. And so I think that the value prop is very clear, is optimize the sales process, optimize the conversion events between each step, optimize the cost to acquire, more revenue across this entire value chain. The question, and I think the key point that you brought up previously, is how do you get sales reps to actually do it, right? And so one of the things that I've been a fractional chief revenue officer at a variety of SaaS companies and agencies. And when I go in, I literally have a deck that is specifically to convince and teach and enroll sales reps just to listen to me. Just like, please, for the love of God, just follow the process I put in front of you. Because I will go in and I'll deploy my sales process. I'll set up the CRM. I'll set up my automations. And I'll say, sales rep, do it. And then, like you said, crickets.
Yeah.
So, and I have to do daily checkouts. I mean, there has to be incentives for using the CRM. If you try to do this in the oil and gas industry, you're cooked, because no sales rep ever wants to do it. For some reason, oil and gas sales reps are notoriously bad at it. So how do you, given that you are optimizing, and I assume relatively frequently, is that right? Or is it a one-off optimization?
No, we'll definitely iterate. You don't want to do it too frequently, because then it's just confusing for users. But you definitely, on a quarterly basis, semi-annual basis, want to revisit the process.
Okay, so it's not like weekly. But I guess that gets to my point, is that one of the challenges of adoption of this would be, how do you get end user sales reps to play ball? Do you have change management training? How does is there a deep onboarding and implementation phase? How do you actually get people to use this?
So this is the beauty of the solution. You don't get people to use it. It just happens in the background. And let me explain what I mean by that. The traditional approach is exactly what you described. I take you out of the field. You already resent the fact that you're out of the field. And I put you in a conference room or on a Zoom call for a couple days. And I just barrage you with all of this information. Here's the sales process. Let's go through the 10 stages in all the minutia. And you're ready to blow your brains out by the time you get to the end of the first day. And guess how much information you're absorbing there. And then it takes about a year of your boss hammering you and saying, why didn't you fill out the CRM field? instead of having a real conversation about how to close the deal. So the way we get people to adopt the sales process is we stop asking them to adopt the sales process. Reps want to win. Well, they don't want to win. You probably don't want them as a rep, but they want to win. So we have a combination of two things. First of all, the process is entered into the system, and it generates prompts that are constantly crawling your revenue data to update all the prompts automatically. So we now have a very structured view of what's going on in this deal. We then have a second facet of the product where the rep can basically just sit down and say, "Man, I'm really worried about this deal. I'm worried that it's stalled. What do I do?" It's literally having a conversation with the AI as though we're talking to this omniscient being that knew everything about the deal and everything about the account. And because we've preloaded the sales process that you want the rep to follow, the responses of the AI are informed by the process. And so the answers that it's going to give you are consistent with the general sales process, but enhanced and tailored to that specific account. As an example, I was just in a deal review yesterday with my head of sales. There was an account, it had stalled out. We pulled up the AI and we said, how do we get this deal unstuck? And the AI literally broke down, all right, it's owned by this PE firm. You guys know these people. They're talking over here to these other accounts. You really need to play that card. Let me actually write an email for you that hits the key initiatives that you already know about, and we can engage the PE partner that you know to actually deliver that message. All right, so I didn't even realize I was following our sales process. All I knew is, man, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought about that. And you're writing an email for me too? Yeah, let's do that. So you're guiding me based on principles that have been trained into the model. But my focus is winning the deal, not filling out a stupid field in a sales process that I don't even believe is going to help me to win.
So it goes beyond sales process optimization and actually is almost like a post lead capture account rep that is kind of human in the loop, sidecar, hey, whispering into the rep's ear. And I assume there's some type of interface that has like a pop out drawer that says blah, 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 blah. And it says, here's where we're at. This is the next action item. And then it automatically changes status. Is that the deal?
Yeah. And even beyond that, it's not static. You're literally having ongoing conversations with it. And it's, I call it the sales thought partner. Hey, well, if I did this, yeah, I'm worried though that if I tried that, they would respond this way. How do I mitigate that risk? It is as though you were sitting next to the greatest, think of the digitized version of John McMahon who knew everything about that particular deal and that particular account. And you just had an hour of his undivided attention to help you figure this thing out. Mm-hmm. So we've gone from kind of a very antiquated, I would say, way of thinking, which is please fill out the field, which reps are just like, why am I filling out this field? To a set of static recommendations where if you put in the information, the AI is smart enough to give you a set of canned responses, to literally a real-time dynamic discussion, thought partner, where you can have a conversation, you can push back, you can challenge the AI, and the AI will keep coming back at you so that by the time you actually execute that, you've really thought it through.
Is this listening in on, I assume it's analyzing emails. Is it listening in on call transcripts and then actually setting statuses off of the outcomes of the calls? Does it handle that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so it's on all your calls. And in fact, if you're in person, there's technology that we interface with that will allow you to capture all that transcript, in person. It's reading all of your email. It's going through all of the CRM. So the magic that makes this work, and it definitely sounds sci-fi, but mm-hmm. I mean, I'm in the middle of this, and it just blows my mind. Mm-hmm. the capabilities here. The key though is context. The AI is only as good as the context that you feed it. It's not mm-hmm. enough just to do a giant dump of all your call transcripts into the mm-hmm. system. What you really need, we call it a revenue graph. So the revenue graph is basically crawling your entire infrastructure. It's finding every little detail about a deal, whether it's locked in a call transcript or an email or CRM. And it's intelligently aggregating that. And that sounds pretty straightforward. It's a hard problem to solve, though. And here's why. A lot of that context that you need is locked away in your personal inbox. So Ben gets an email and the prospect says, Ben, I'm in if you can work out the issue in EMEA. Okay, so problem number one, that's in your inbox. The CRO isn't allowed to go into your inbox and read your email. Problem number two is that email just said, I'm in if you can figure out the problem in EMEA. What is EMEA? There's no off-the-shelf product that knows how you define EMEA. And then problem number three is that is a discrete data point that is not in any way connected to a deal. There's no identifier that says, link this email to this deal. So the magic of the AI that we've built is it's able to, number one, bypass all of those access controls. It knows that the CRO needs to see that email. It's not going to expose all your personal emails, but it will pull that email into the graph. It knows what EMEA means because it's been able to learn and understand how you define that. And it's intelligently able to use context clues to infer what that email goes to. So what happens is you're getting this constantly enriched graph of information related to the deals and the accounts. And that becomes essentially the brain that powers this conversation that you're then able to have with the AI.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I just beat into the market is that AI without context, and context is only possible with access, which requires really great domain models, data merging, deduplication, and normalization across all the data sets into one place. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have that, you don't have good AI outcomes, generally speaking.
Right.
And so the way I look at AI is it's like a really smart, the smartest person you ever met, but the smartest person you ever met without any information is just a really fast processing thing. That's it. You know, it's all about the access to the info. And that's the reason why synthetic data and training data sets is a thing. That's the reason why, you know, the ability to tie into all the different silos of data stores is so important for the AI. And so it thirsts for more information.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I'm curious how you guys handle is that the CRM, the number one thing that I hear about CRMs is just, man, they're just deduplication hell. Mm-hmm. It's just missing data, inaccurate data. Say that the industry field has 20 different data sets across the years, from Zoom Info to Apollo to you name it, and some manual entry from the sales rep. And now you have some weird normalized O&G for oil and gas, oil and then gas and then oil and gas, right? And it's just the industry field. And so there's no like canonical schema or domain model to allow the AI to look at it accurately.
Yeah.
Does that impact your results, or how do you guys look at that?
So the quality of the data is fundamental to the quality of the output. And this goes back to my Ferrari analogy. The reason that your data is a mess is because, you know, you let the nuts scatter that Ferrari all over the road. Again, at the end of the day, if salespeople are touching the system, they are not thinking, and I'm not disparaging a salesperson. We don't want them to be operating at this level, but they're creating duplicate accounts and they're misassociating and they're, you know, not searching the system the way they should. And after you've been running this thing for a couple of years and you got a couple thousand reps that are in it doing that every day, the system just becomes this nightmare of data.
Right.
So again, and I sound like a broken record, the answer is don't let the humans touch the system.
Right.
We now have the luxury of having some really great tools out there that can go in and do the initial cleansing on the data. You know, we all love Clay. Scale Stack is another product that I'm really bullish on. Those basically have codified data systems, and they interface with any number of different records and then enhance that with the firmographic data and the technographic data to allow you to get to a point where you're able to really clean that data and understand that data and dedupe that data. Once you get to that point, the name of the game then is on an ongoing basis, let the system update itself. Don't ask the reps to do it. If you do that, you keep a pristine data set and you make the reps a lot happier too, because they never wanted to do that in the first place.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think that...
Ben, I wanted to go back to one point that you made though, because I think it's so important, which is the context point. I love using ChatGPT from a health perspective. And there's kind of three different levels that I've kind of evolved through. The first go that I had at ChatGPT for health was, hey, give me some pointers. I'm a 53-year-old male on how I can be healthy. And with that amount of information, you can expect what I got. It's like, don't eat a bunch of steaks every night and go exercise. Then I got some test results back, and I dumped those into ChatGPT, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Here's what your test results say. Here's what you need to be doing to address that. And then the third level of evolution was I got into a discussion, and I said, here's what I'm worried about. Here are my goals in life. Here's my family. And we started to talk, and it literally became a dietitian for me that allowed me to jointly build this plan together. We can't do that in sales, or we couldn't do that in sales, because the information required to provide the rich context wasn't there. Now we have that information there, and you're able to have the same level of richness in that discussion that you can have in the other types of interactions you're having with ChatGPT.
Yeah, no doubt. So my company, RevOps, my SaaS, our entire vision is solving this problem, which is there is no end-to-end, fully encompassing center of truth across the entire set of systems of records that a GTM team touches. So for example, you mentioned Clay. So this is typically what I say, is that you have some combination of a enrichment tool. I call it the whole new world because, as you and I know, with AI, this data scraping is crazy. You can now pull lists at a fraction of the cost that are fresher and better than they ever were from ZoomInfo. And the problem is that it creates a secondary problem. So you have more data, and you have better data, and you have more signals and better signals, but it's coming from more places. And as a result, you have more schemas and more scattered and more and more and more. And so it creates a fundamental challenge of merging and deduplication. And so what we found was that there is no real great way to take the Clay data and the Apollo data and the ZoomInfo data and say Trigify and say you have a third-party sequencer, right? You have a Instantly or a Smart Lead or an Email Bison, and you have a LinkedIn thing, and I could keep going, right? And the problem is that then you get into the CRM, and the CRM has a SalesLoft or Outreach or something hooked up to it on the dialer side. And then you have, some other, maybe HubSpot. I see those all the time. I'm sure you do too. HubSpot and Salesforce. And it's like, this is getting crazy, guys. And so what we set to do at RevOps was to connect to all those systems, unify it, deduplicate it, merge it, normalize it, so that we could then start to do similar things that you're trying to do, but not on the sales process side or the sales enablement side, but more of just what the heck is going on across all these systems? What's actually working here, But it's foundational, because if you don't have access, you got nothing. It's all about the access. And it was interesting. I was listening to, I can't remember, some billionaire, name your billionaire type guy on a podcast. And he was talking about the AI kill zone, which is like, where does AI just come in from, some large language model in the next year and just takes out 30% of a SaaS market just because it has more capabilities. And the answer he gave made perfect sense to me, which is those companies that are able to connect into multiple data stores and normalize across multiple data stores while using the AI are the ones that will survive. And those that are essentially just a wrapper on top of any data set you can imagine without some other layer of integration and normalization will probably be taken out.
Yeah.
And that's the fundamental difference. Do you see that the same way, or what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think there's been a fundamental shift in how we think about applications. In the SaaS world, it was all about owning the user interface. And I remember debating this at big companies, at LinkedIn, at Oracle, at Siebel. How can we own the user interface that the people use to do the work that they need to do? And that mindset has shifted. Today, certainly there's an access portal that you would use, and the LLMs have their access portals, but there is a whole new layer of context that is arguably just as important, if not more important, than the access portal. And companies that are successful at building the underlying graph that provides the context, that powers the experience, are going to be indispensable in this new world as well. And so I think shifting that mindset from you don't need to own the user experience or the user interface. If you do, that's fine. But there are other things that you could own that will create just as much value in this new world.
I couldn't have said it better myself. What's strange and also I think an opportunity at the same time is that there's a large swath of the GTM community that doesn't understand this. And this gets back to kind of thought leadership and who do you sell to? Because if we talk about, the good old school awareness scale of people that are unaware, problem aware, solution aware, et cetera, there's a huge segment of the market that just says, I want a dashboard. I want better information, right? Yeah. Especially, I'm not talking about the more established companies that probably have professional CROs and they have some analysts and they have a revenue operations person. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the mid-market to the small end of the market, even the small companies, $1 million to say $20 million in revenue. There's a whole world there. In fact, it's probably most of the companies on planet Earth. And they all have a CRM. Many of them probably use HubSpot. And they are completely unaware of the dynamics we've been describing on this call. And so I think to some degree that creates a challenge in selling solutions like ours, in a sense, which is, what is the value prop? Because they just say, oh yeah, my sales reps are performing better, right? But there's a deeper set of challenges to adoption, which is, well, your data sucks. Well, it's like, okay, well, what do we do about that? Mm-hmm. Well, we got to go and start enriching it and pushing the data in. And as soon as we or you or anybody brings up that conversations, people's eyes roll back in the back of their head.
Yeah.
And foundational data discussions are just very nauseating to people. So how do you think about that impacting your adoption? How do you think about that impacting your solution's ability to perform? I'm just curious about your thoughts on that part of the market.
One of the conversations we have a lot with our customers is the fact that the game has changed, and because the game has changed, you need to put a very different team on the field if you want to win. You think about, if you've built this team, it's an amazing team, amazing football team, and suddenly somebody says, today we're playing basketball, and you're like, oh, I got a guard, I'll just pull my guard from my football team because we need a guard on the basketball team, and I'll throw them in there. The problem is that when you put that guard from football on the basketball court, they're still thinking that the game they're playing is football. And one of the major issues that companies have is they're trying to bring the mindset of the go-to-market motion and the engine that they were building over the past 10 years into this new era. If you want to win the game, you got to recognize the game has changed. You need to put a fundamentally different athlete on the field. As an example, RevOps historically has employed very bright analysts that are able to find the data, build the dashboards, understand the dashboards, and boil it up to a PowerPoint presentation they present. In the new future, the RevOps team will be very adept at asking the right questions and formatting and structuring those in a way that optimizes for the LLM. So if you're just trying to put the old team on the new field, you're going to get lapped. And we spend a lot of time talking about what are the new roles, what are the criteria, how you don't want to obviously get rid of your team, but you want to make strategic enhancements to your team. And smart people will make the evolution, but there need to be some key people that kind of lead the charge on that front.
It's I talk about this a lot, that there is a strange taxonomy of sales personas that is now shuffling on the board, and I remember even when the concept of an SDR was kind of a new idea, right? And then well, how many SDRs do you have? And where, do you need an SDR? Is it full cycle? What about the sales enablement, sales engineer person? And so there's these kind of new terms that come up, and then it's customer success. What the hell is customer success?
Yeah.
And now and I think that especially for me in my earlier career, I would hear terms and just thought that they were established forever and always, and that was the way of the world.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out there's some forces at play, the zeitgeist, so to speak, that are coining and normalizing these terms in the consciousness of man. And and an example of that just happened where the term GTM engineer did not exist 2 to 3 years ago. And it was coined by Varun, who was the CEO of Clay, who is the CEO of Clay, in order to, for better or worse, help promote the use of his tool, which, to your point about earlier about sales reps having a psychographic of creativity, there was this pent-up demand in the market for sales reps who actually wanted to just go build stuff, to then use low-code products like Cursor and Claude and Lovable along with Clay to go and create. And so all of a sudden this whole new ecosystem is born because there's billions of dollars being spent across all these SaaS companies that are promoting this whole new world. And boom, you have a GTM engineer.
Yeah.
But I can say even a year ago, people were like, what the hell's a GTM engineer? And I've literally like written articles. Well, this is what a GTM engineer is. But what I've found is that there's a divide right now between RevOps and GTM engineers, because RevOps, you typically have a gap between, say, $10 million in revenue-ish, that's on like the very low end, and say your billion-dollar companies, and then there's people below, say, 10 million. Very rarely have I seen a revenue operations person in a company below 10 million. Usually it's like the owner and some director of sales who's kind of playing sales ops. And so typically those RevOps people are highly paid, highly analytical, working at very big organizations. They're focused typically on HubSpot and Salesforce. Whereas the small end of the market where these GTM engineers lived, they came from 25-year-old kids who are starting their first business, playing with clay, and are now evangelizing this new product. And they have absolutely no experience in revenue operations. In fact, they despise the discipline. And there's this weird cultural clash between kind of the new age GTM guys and the RevOps people. And so I've recently, I hope that I get credit someday if this ever works, but I've coined a term called revenue engineer. And the idea is that I think there's a new word which needs to describe, you can't just be the old school RevOps people, and you can't just be a GTM engineer. You have to know the full cycle.
Yeah.
You have to know post lead capture and pre lead capture. So I agree. We're in this weird transitionary period where people are literally fighting for truth. Like, what is real? Who is the team?
Well, the GTM engineer really had its origin in the Palantir forward deployed engineer model. And it's kind of a variation on that, optimized obviously for Clay and the business that they do. But if you look now at the models that Anthropic and Mistral and OpenAI have adopted, they're all employing the forward deployed engineer. But what's unique about them is that they're very specialized. Mistral is one of our customers, and it's been fascinating to look at just their go-to-market. They've got forward deployed engineers for oil and gas and for telco and for CPG. These people really understand the industry and understand the complexities, can then go in and identify ways to solve problems, but they're doing it from a very well-informed base. I would actually say this is kind of the new version of McKinsey. The people that are hiring, that Anthropic and Mistral are hiring, are similar caliber, but a different discipline. And I think that that's how the RevOps team is going to evolve as well. Very understanding of the challenges, the issues, the nuances, but also adept at using this new technology to solve that rather than humans.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think that it's kind of trite, but the number one thing that actually matters in sales is aligning incentives and also building trust and believability. And the number one thing that will do that is subject matter expertise, because they can look and understand the incentive structure of the organization. Like, to your point of like, why now, why us? It's like, okay, the only person that can actually explain that and articulate that in a meaningful way that is believed by the end buyer is somebody who actually has credibility from some level of experience. And I think you're right, is that as we go deeper and deeper into the future, I think that the more bespoke and nuanced you can be in your subject matter expertise within the product line you're selling it to, I think the better. And it makes a lot of sense, because I think that there's a great quote from Tony Robbins I saw yesterday where he said, the world is awash in information and devoid of wisdom, or something like that, where it's like it's thirsting for wisdom. And so the more information we get, everyone can kind of play subject matter expert. Like, I got my glasses on with AI in it, so this is, you know what I mean? And so there's going to be like avatars on Zoom info or Zoom in a few years, and there's going to be all these AI influencers who make people look great on LinkedIn, and they show up to a sales call and they don't know what they're talking about. So I think that true subject matter expertise is the moat, and I think the smart companies, I think you're right, are going to go to market with people that really know their shit.
Yep.
Do you have anything to add to that? I mean, I just was kind of going off. I don't know. I wasn't asking a question.
People have made a lot of money on verticalizing their business. I think of David Schreiber, who started at Siebel and then went off and built a CRM for verticals and made a lot of money on that. So I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that, and it does come down to a very refined understanding of the customer that you're solving and recognizing that telco is not CPG and you need to treat them differently as a result of that.
So speaking of which, tell me about the origin story and how did the first version come to be? Did you guys raise cash? What did that beachhead market look like? Can you give us any context there?
So we actually have our origin in forecasting. We saw a very interesting trend. Obviously, Clary, Aviso blazed the trail. To a large extent, they built their platforms on top of CRM and were highly dependent on the data that lived in CRM. Problem with CRM is it was built back, hard to believe now, but Benioff, I think, produced the first code in 95, if you can believe it. So that product is 30 years old now. At the time, you had one flavor of revenue. Salesperson went out, they closed the fixed price contract, maintenance was mandatory, and they needed a system to store that information in. They've had to flex that system, which fundamentally was built around that use case, to try to accommodate all the different kinds of revenue since then, and the cracks really started to show. Today we have usage-based revenue models. We have PLG motions. We have renewal expansion motions that are worth more than new logo acquisition. And as those revenue streams have come online, CRM has really fallen short. The CRO today probably is managing most of their revenue in spreadsheets because Salesforce was not built to handle PLG or renewal expansion. So that was the opportunity that we saw. We built a system that could handle data from any revenue-facing system, not just CRM, made it very easy to model different revenue streams, and ended up getting adopted by some really large customers, MongoDB, Cloudflare. Once we got to that point, what we realized is we kept hearing customers say, great, I can now get visibility into my forecast, but it's not accurate. And we realized it wasn't accurate because the data underneath it wasn't accurate. And also, no matter how accurate it was, we weren't changing outcomes. And that's what really quickly moved us into agents and how do you actually improve deal execution. And now we've got a really nice flywheel where the revenue graph picks up all the signal, which then prompts the reps to get better outcomes, which then gets fed into the forecast, and you've got this flywheel effect.
Makes sense. So basically, it's the fundamental challenge was actually the data quality because the sales rep sucked. And so then you saw that in the forecast, and then you worked backwards and said, okay, how can we make the forecast better? I get it. That's fascinating. It all comes down to sales reps just sucking at the CRM.
Well, and again, we don't want them to be good at CRM, right? You've had those salespeople that love CRM. They love updating their system. And guess what? They're not closers. So I'll go hire the closers. We can get the agents to do the other stuff.
That's funny. So I know we're running out of time here. I always ask a final question, which is, it can be revenue related, can be business related, can be anything. But this is my favorite question, which is, if you were to go leave this planet, never return, I'm not saying die, because I think that's too morbid, but you wanted to leave a final message and they happen to come across this podcast and this is the only thing they ever saw of you, what would you share with the world?
Oh, wow. Now we're switching into the personal mode. I actually think we're at an existential moment where I think all of humanity is kind of questioning its value and its purpose for existing. As AI gets smarter and smarter and does more and more of the work that we do, like, why do we exist? And the way that I would answer that question is learning and growing and feeling like this year I do more than I could do last year. And I hope that the legacy I leave behind has been able to unlock the ability for people to grow beyond where they are today. I think ultimately for me, that's what's most satisfying. I think over the long term, humanity is going to find a way to continue to grow and evolve. And we're going to have these tools that will be accelerants. But it's that spirit that's going to continue to push us forward and help us to have meaning.
This comes back to the Raval Navikon statement of like his journey and how he sold his companies and got bored and then went on this journey. And I think everybody seems to, Alex Hormozi talks about this a lot, which is like, why does he continue? Like the fundamental question, if you made it, you got to the top. Will Smith talks about the cliff top. Mm-hmm. He says, you've heard about rock bottom, but there's cliff top where you get to this existential crisis of meaning.
Yeah.
And everybody seems to ultimately come back to the same place, which is like as old as time, which is self-actualization. It's like, how do you become ultimately content and at peace with your own being? And for me, I think this gets more into like philosophy, but it's like the Nietzschean version of reality where there's this force to power, kind of you create your own terms and then you live by them, you set your own values and pursue life through them. And I think about this a lot, and I can't disagree with it. It's just like at the end of the day, there's only so many glasses of wine you can drink and only so many filet mignons you can eat. It's like where we live in abundance, but we live in a lack of purpose.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is why people do hard shit. This is why you probably are pursuing a hard thing. You could probably go get a cushy job as, a CEO or CRO at some larger company, but you're pursuing your own thing. So anyways, I appreciate you. Where can people find you online?
So check me out on LinkedIn, Justin Schreiber. Give us a visit at Tarot. We'll get you set up on these agents, get your salespeople doing what they should be doing, and taking all the, as I said, as I started, taking the sales chores off their place because sellers going to sell. I think Taylor Swift said that.
Great. Well, everyone, there's going to be some links in the show notes. Go show them some love. This will be obviously across Spotify, YouTube, and the various RSS channels. And if you're in the school group, if you're not in the school group, Next Gen Sales Systems, you can go find it in the school group as well. So thanks again, and I'll see you guys later on the Next Gen Sales Leaders podcast. See you guys.